The topic we are addressing today is silence and the emotional depth it creates over time. The longer silence lasts, the deeper it is often felt, especially within emotional and romantic connections. Before this idea triggers quick reactions, it is important to slow down and understand what it actually means. This is not about punishment, manipulation, or emotional games. It is about emotional impact, perception, and the way silence affects the human mind when connection already exists. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, this is a space where relationships, emotional experiences, and unspoken dynamics are explored honestly and thoughtfully. Many people feel these things but struggle to put them into words. Speaking from professional experience in therapeutic settings, one uncomfortable truth becomes clear over time: silence is rarely neutral. Many people believe silence means nothing is happening, that no words equal no action. Emotionally, that is almost never the case. Silence carries weight, and in relationships, it often lands far deeper than spoken words. In countless sessions, individuals have shared feelings of confusion, emotional unease, and inner instability. What caused this was not yelling, insults, or dramatic endings. It was the quiet absence of communication from someone they cared about. No explanation, no closure, just distance. What stands out is not the silence itself, but what happens inside the mind because of it. Silence becomes a reflective surface. Fears project onto it. Doubts grow stronger. Questions multiply without answers. Many men underestimate the emotional impact of their absence. They often believe that if nothing was said, then nothing was done. Emotionally, that is rarely how silence is experienced. Silence creates space for reflection. It creates an environment where emotions echo and repeat. For many women, that space does not feel calm or peaceful. It feels heavy and unsettled. One individual once explained that they replayed every conversation repeatedly because there was nothing new to ground their emotions. This is the effect silence has. It invites the mind to fill in gaps, and the mind is rarely gentle when left without clarity. This is not about blame or elevating one gender over another. It is about understanding how emotional processing works. Silence shifts emotional balance, not through aggression but through the removal of reassurance. It disrupts emotional rhythm. In the following sections, the focus is on why silence feels so intense, how it is interpreted emotionally, and what it communicates, whether intended or not. These insights are drawn not only from theory, but from lived emotional patterns observed repeatedly over time. Silence is rarely emotionally neutral. Many assume silence is empty, but in emotional dynamics, especially romantic ones, silence is always interpreted. It is translated emotionally whether intention exists or not. Silence pauses emotional connection, and when attachment is involved, the nervous system does not relax. It becomes alert. It searches for meaning. It tries to protect itself. This is why silence often feels heavier than words. Words can be challenged or clarified. Silence simply remains unanswered. Unanswered experiences tend to grow stronger with time. People often say that if something had been said, even something difficult, they could have handled it. The reaction is not to rejection or disagreement, but to uncertainty. Silence removes emotional landmarks. Without feedback, the mind fills the space, often with fear, doubt, or self-questioning. Emotionally, silence feels like being left alone with unanswered questions. When feelings already exist, that isolation can feel deeply personal. Over time, silence begins to feel intentional even when it is not. This is where emotional weight accumulates. Silence does not pause emotions, it intensifies them. Emotions need movement and acknowledgement to settle. Without movement, emotions loop and deepen. The absence of communication eventually becomes the message itself. Silence removes reassurance without confrontation, creating ambiguity that generates emotional tension. Tension that remains unresolved often leaves lasting emotional impressions. Silence is not always unhealthy. It can be necessary and protective. However, emotionally, it is never empty. It always carries meaning to the person receiving it. When answers disappear, the mind becomes active. Many assume that silence places a situation on pause. Emotionally, the opposite happens. The mind searches for resolution. Past conversations are replayed, tone, timing, and meaning are analyzed. This is not overthinking at first. It is the brain attempting to restore emotional balance. Without external clarity, the mind turns inward. Inward thinking is rarely neutral or objective. Silence feels significant, not empty. Questions begin to form naturally. Did something go wrong? Was something missed? Was someone replaced? These questions arise not from drama, but from human attachment. Silence creates an emotional vacuum, and the mind fills it with meaning driven by emotion rather than logic. When emotional attachment exists, silence can feel like potential loss rather than space. This is where emotional impact deepens. Silence also disrupts emotional rhythm. Relationships form patterns of interaction. When those patterns suddenly stop, the nervous system reacts. Emotional safety relies on predictability. Silence removes predictability, leading the mind to scan for rejection or emotional danger. Silence does not stop emotional processing. It accelerates it and often leaves a deeper imprint than confrontation. Silence is often misunderstood as absence. Emotionally, it is experienced as distance. Distance feels intentional even when it is not. Emotional distance keeps connections stretched rather than removed. Stretched connections create tension and emotional pull. Silence keeps someone emotionally present but unreachable. This unresolved state prevents closure and intensifies emotional engagement. Emotional distance often feels like evaluation. Silence can feel like a decision is being made privately. This perception alone creates vulnerability and emotional unease. Many men use silence to process or avoid conflict. Emotional impact, however, is determined by experience, not intention. Silence changes emotional positioning. It does not remove presence. It creates an in-between space where emotions intensify rather than fade. Silence also triggers self-reflection. In relationships, silence often turns the mind inward before it creates confusion. Communication provides reassurance and emotional regulation. When it stops, individuals often assume responsibility for the change. They review their behavior and words, searching for mistakes. Silence creates a mirror that magnifies self. This doubt does not come from insecurity alone. It comes from emotional investment. When connection matters, silence feels like emotional withdrawal. Without explanation, the mind assumes fault because responsibility feels more manageable than uncertainty. Silence also removes emotional feedback, leaving the mind to create narratives that often lean towards self-blame. Patterns and expectations play a role. When silence disrupts established rhythm, it feels like a signal that something has changed. Without explanation, doubt fills the gap. Silence is rarely interpreted as rest. It is often interpreted as evaluation or distance. There is a critical difference between silence and emotional control. Silence can come from overwhelm or self-regulation. Emotional control involves withholding. When silence feels deliberate and creates pressure, emotional safety is disrupted. Access to connection begins to feel conditional. This creates imbalance rather than intimacy. Healthy silence is temporary and followed by reconnection. Controlling silence often follows conflict and disappears only when behavior changes. This teaches self-censorship rather than mutual respect. Intent does not erase impact. Transparency determines whether silence supports clarity or creates pressure. Silence can also create long-lasting emotional imprints. The body remembers how it felt to wait and wonder. Even after communication resumes, emotional memory remains. Repeated silence during vulnerable moments teaches the nervous system that connection can be withdrawn unexpectedly. Over time, this creates caution, emotional restraint, and heightened sensitivity to changes. These imprints form quietly, without dramatic events. Silence teaches through absence. When followed by understanding and reconnection, its impact softens. When repeated without clarity, it deepens. Relationships remember emotional experiences more than words. Silence leaves marks, not through conflict, but through hesitation, guardedness, and unspoken fear of disconnection. Understanding silence changes how presence and absence are viewed. Silence communicates emotional shifts long before words do. When handled with awareness, it can create space for growth. When left unexplained, it reshapes emotional safety. Silence is never invisible. It speaks whether intended or not.